10 years ago, these decaying houses were family homes. Not so long ago, children played in these overgrown yards. Couples took walks down these lifeless streets. Commerce flourished in these empty storefronts. Families strolled down these city blocks, now overrun with weeds and cluttered with warning signs. A community once thrived in this apocalyptic ghost town. Welcome to Picher, Oklahoma, the most toxic city in America. Over 100 years ago, the mining industry built up this small Oklahoma town. But the very thing that created this city ultimately brought about its downfall and forever altered hundreds of lives. The first inhabitants of the northern area of Oklahoma where Picher would be built was the Quapaw tribe. They were removed to Indian Territory in 1834.
At one time there were, tens of thousands of Quapaw, but by the time they reached Oklahoma, there were only a few families left. So they were given this small little patch in northeast Oklahoma as a reservation. And then in the early 1900s, 1902, 1905, they discovered lead and zinc on the reservation.
Many Quapaw tribal members refused to lease their land to the mining companies. For the companies, a fortune was at stake, so they tried to acquire mining licenses through the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs.
The BIA went to Congress and had individual tribal members declared incompetent so they could sign mining leases on their behalf. So in the early 1900s, they started mining for lead and zinc on the Quapaw tribe's reservation.
Once the Quapaw tribe was out of the way, Picher got its start as a 20th century boomtown. The lead found in Picher in 1914 was just in time for World War I to spur boosted demand for ammunition. The town supplied more than half of the bullets fired in the war. Soon, there were thousands of people working in the Picher mining field. In the 1920s, Picher was processing 10 million pounds of ore per day at 227 mills. By 1926, the population of Picher was 14,000 strong. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, the demand for metals surged once again. Miners discovered vast deposits of zinc in Picher, which was mined to keep steel products from rusting during World War II. The town became one of the largest exporters of zinc and lead in the world.
And they took, close to 200 million tons of rock out of the underground, and the tailings that they left behind were piled up on the surface. Now it just looks like a moonscape with all these huge tailings piles called chat. That's the name, the slang for the mine.
According to the U.S. Bureau of Mines, the Picher mining field produced 1.7 million tons of lead and 8.8 million tons of zinc between 1891 and 1970. The profit was about $202 million. But Picher's wild success came at a high cost. What actually came out of the ground was unconcentrated crude ore that needed to be treated. To separate the waste rock from the valuable metals, miners had to reverse the natural geothermal technique that created it. The ore was crushed into a fine, sand-like substance, then sorted in local mills. Finally, the ore was superheated to melt away any impurities. With the help of the electric air compressor, miners were able to use powerful drills and water pumps to bore deep into the earth. The mills also used froth flotation ponds to separate metals. These ponds are filled with chemicals that bond to minerals so that every fragment of zinc and lead will float to the top. Useless residue was all that remained once the valuable minerals were extracted. Picher processed nearly 181 million tons of ore, and the leftovers were piled into Chat Mountains outside the mine. Over time, a 7,000-acre ridgeline was built up with chat piles as high as 300 feet. In 1967, the mines shut down. The mining companies abandoned Picher to deal with the impact of its industrial abuse. 14,000 mine shafts were deserted, and 30 chat piles weighing 178 million tons were left behind. The fine grains from the chat piles blew all over town. The entire community breathed them in without realizing the piles were toxic. The industrial water pumps were also shut off. Soon, the underground caverns that miners created were refilled with groundwater and leaked acid into a local creek called Tar Creek. Shortly after that, the town's water became hazardous to drink. The discarded mining tunnels created massive sinkholes that collapsed houses and streets. Children returned home from swimming in ponds near the mines with what was thought to be sunburns, but was actually a reaction to swimming in water laced with acidic chemicals. By 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency placed Picher on the national priority list for cleanup and declared it a Superfund site. Still, many Picher residents remained unconscious of poisoning taking place.
So Picher is one of the towns we played in on a regular basis, and so we knew people there and grew up going into the chat piles, running quads on the chat piles and stuff like that. And then hear stories about mining. Anybody that grows up in that area, especially that has a family history, has some kind of story, whether it ties back to the mines or Mickey Mantle and stuff like that playing in the mines. I lived about 8 miles away from the piles, about 9 miles, and you drive about 3 miles north of our house and get to the hilltop, and on the right day you could see the tops of the chat, and that'd be about another 8 miles or so. And so, they were huge.
Many people continued to use hazardous chat to fill their driveways and build foundations. Some even used it in their children's sandboxes.
Because growing up, it wasn't uncommon to think that there might be a playground or something that chat was used. All of the roads were chat. So you have all these surfaces and all these areas, driveways, parking lots, because you got a small gravel that's perfect, that's a perfect size for a playground and stuff. So all these things have this chat because it's cheap and you can just get rid of it.
The creeks in Picher continued to be popular swimming holes. No one realized that the water's orange coloring came from cadmium and arsenic.
The other problem is that all those mines were in an aquifer region, and so when the mining stopped, they filled up with water, and the chemistry of the water so that it turns water acidic, and then it starts bubbling up to the surface when we have a lot of rain. It's called acid mine drainage. This acid mine drainage then gets into the natural creek and basically creates rust and kills out all the fish. There's like one catfish and one sucker or something that can survive in this creek, Tar Creek. And so that's going down, and it actually goes down into Grand Lake, which is a large reservoir that people swim in and people fish in and live around. And so you have lead and zinc in the soil, getting in kids' hands and blood, and you have the acid mine drainage.
Over the next 15 years, the Picher community faced challenges that should have indicated the gravity of the toxic levels in the town. The town's school had the lowest test scores in the state. People were sick more often than in other areas. But despite the warning signs, locals didn't become aware of the pollution occurring until the mid-1990s, when blood tests revealed that 63% of Picher's children were suffering from lead poisoning.
So at that time, when I was in school, was a time that they started tying the blood, that a little bit when I was younger, they started seeing the Picher kids having high blood lead levels. About the time I was about that age, junior high or so we're talking early 90s, they started tying it back to, they actually did a big campaign about washing your hands. You play outside, you wash your hands, because they found out, all these kids play. You send a kid outside to play, they're going to eat stuff, without washing their hands. So just the fact of doing a really big campaign on washing their hands was able to reduce that, and that was all happening in the 90s. So we had an idea of this.
Lead accumulates in the body over time through a process called bioaccumulation. The process is irreversible and can cause damaging effects, such as permanent neurological damage and learning disabilities. After that discovery, the United States Environmental Protection Agency spent $140 million to replace topsoil in the area. In 2000, a task force examined Picher's long-term prospects. The final report concluded that the town was unlivable and needed to be evacuated. The Army Corps of Engineers confirmed that 86% of Picher's buildings were dangerously undermined and the town was in danger of collapsing. The earth could swallow the town up at any time. In addition to that, a 2004 EPA Technical Assistance Grant-funded study discovered that disease rates in the Picher area were 20 to 30% above average. chronic lung disease was 2,000 times higher than anywhere else.
No, I've never seen it on the news. I moved to Stillwater in 2000 from that area. I've never seen one thing on the news about anything that was happening. You know, that's that whole time frame when they were doing all the land. There was no talk from the OKC area to Tulsa area about the millions of federal dollars being spent on soil remediation.
In 2005, the government approved a buyout to relocate 52 of the residents. Buyout offers started at $55 per square foot. Over the next several years, a few residents struggled to hold on to their small town.
You know, I was around when they were trying to evacuate that town. And they were really, there was still a stronghold. Picher was still a town until the tornado hit. And I can't remember the exact year, but right in the midst of all that, when about half the town had moved, a large tornado ripped right through the center of town.
Oh my God, that's violent. Oh my God. Yeah, oh my God. Oh, debris.
And that was basically the straw that broke camel's back, and the majority of the residents that left, that was still there, kind of left.
You know, following the tornado, there were still a lot of structures up in town, still standing in town. And I went back for over a period of about 8 years. I'd go a few times a year and make photographs, and each time I went, there were fewer and fewer structures there. But one thing that was kind of striking when I went there the first time after the tornado was the way that personal possessions, pieces of homes, really anything you could imagine was scattered all over the place. And so one of the kind of things I was interested in exploring kind of critically was what happens to memory when all of those things that are embedded with our memory that we keep and make and kind of become personally important to us. What happens when those are kind of spread all out and disconnected from their original context?
It wasn't until 2011 that the buyout was completed. By 2013, the government had spent $301 million on cleanup. Another $178 million is projected to dig new wells and set up water treatment facilities. An EPA record of decision projected that the cleanup will take at least another 30 years. The government returned the toxic waste region or Tar Creek Superfund site to the Quapaw Indian tribe, who owned the land long before lead and zinc were discovered in Picher.
And in 2008, the EPA made a decision to start cleaning up the chat. So 2009, they started cleaning up the chat, and then the tribe said, hey, we could do that. We could do the cleanup because, we have scientists and engineers. We have all the equipment. Why can't the tribe be in charge of the cleanup? So EPA agreed, and in 2014, the tribe took over a majority of the cleanup of the site. So the tribe's been doing cleanup, or has taken the lead on the cleanup of Tar Creek ever since. And to date, we've cleaned up a couple of, maybe 2 to 3 million tons of chat, and every day we're just scooping it up and either putting it back down into the mine, or we're putting it in a giant repository that'll be capped eventually. But we're reclaiming this land that the tribe has, and we're putting it to good use. I mean, even when we take the chat away, we can take the contaminated soil underneath, and then we can plant crops or graze cattle, or put it back to use, which is the tribe's ultimate goal. And there's a lot of positive things, but I mean, the tribe, understandably, is not just ecstatic about getting undermined, polluted land back, But I think the tribe's in the best position to make it something positive.
The Quapaw still own 80% of the Superfund site that includes Picher. After the government buyout, the land reverted to its original owners and the Quapaw became the first tribe to manage a Superfund site cleanup.
And it was the first ever, teaming up of a tribe and a state to do Superfund cleanup. So not only was it first for the tribe to take a lead on the EPA Superfund side, we were the first tribe to team with a state to do cleanup, on state land. So, it's been, we had to develop a lot of new processes, a lot of oversight had to be established, but now that we're going and we've got these systems and oversights in place, it's been going very, very smoothly. So, everybody wins. EPA wins because they're getting efficient cleanup. Tribe wins because we're getting our land cleaned up and we're employing people locally. State wins because it's a lot cheaper for us to do it than hire their contractors. So, it's win-win for everybody.
About 30 million yards of chat remain in Picher. On windy days, the toxic dust swirls around the decaying town. What's left of the high school still lies surrounded by mountains of chat. The doors are boarded up, the windows are shattered, and the halls are coated in lead dust. The football field is overgrown, and sidewalks have been overtaken by weeds. Concrete slabs are there, but the homes that once rested on them are not. Animals make up Picher's last residence, but the contaminated town is hazardous even for wildlife. More than 1,000 migratory birds were found dead across Picher in 2015.
Unfortunately, since the people have moved out, it's become kind of an attractive nuisance for wildlife. Wildlife, once people leave, wildlife comes back in, but they're being exposed at a higher rate than to heavy metals. So that's why it's really imperative that we continue the cleanup and expedite the cleanup, to get rid of the chat in the streams and the chat in the uplands and make sure that, those ecological receptors aren't being continuously exposed. But once the contaminants are removed, then we want wildlife to come back in, and it will. It already is. So the critical thing is to get rid of the pollution so the animals aren't being exposed as fast as we can.
Picher one time had Picher and Quapaw and Commerce, multiple movie theaters. It was like OKC or Tulsa at the time. It was a massive boom town, and it set that region. That's why northeast Oklahoma, southwest Missouri, and southeast Kansas is the way it is because of the mining, tri-state mining area. But the land is devastated. If you think about removing millions and millions and millions of tons of rock from underneath the ground and put it on top of the surface. And then the after effects, the acid mine drainage, water coming up, the impact on the land, the impact on the people and all that stuff. It's a very rich history, but it's also sad at the same time.
But this site, it's out in the middle of rural Oklahoma. Nobody important really lives here. Even the towns were dissolved. So, if it doesn't affect people's day-to-day lives, they forget about it. So, especially after this many years, it's just sort of a forgotten spot on the map. It's really not. People don't drive through here. There's no large cities. It's like I said, it's rural. So, people, especially after several generations, people just don't learn about it.
I think people should know about Picher because we're faced with some of the same issues today. I think we have a tendency to make the same mistakes over and over again. I think that we're in the process of at least raising the possibility that things like this could happen again. The Environmental Protection Agency is being weakened. We are, I just think that it's we're in danger of creating similar problems elsewhere.
Little is left of the town, and people who lived there are now just a memory. Tragically, this memory has already begun to fade. Millions of dollars and countless hours have gone into the cleanup of this travesty, but when the chat piles are gone and the water is clean, why must we remember this small, rural Oklahoma town? Remembering our foolishness is the surest way to prevent its repetition. By this remembrance, we can restrict the avoidable perpetuation of human suffering and environmental massacre.